certain sadness hangs over the fort today. Its once splendid buildings lie in ruins, covered with the overgrowth of history. And yet, this fort had an exciting past. It provided the majestic backdrop to a dramatic conflict between a sultan and a saint. The Tughlakabad Fort was built in the 14th century by the Sultan Ghiasuddin Tughlak. He'd occupied the throne of Delhi soon after the death of Sultan Alauddin Khilji. During the reign of Sultan Ghiasuddin Tughlak, there lived in Delhi the great Sufi saint of the Chishtiya order, Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya. Sheikh Nizamuddin preached the doctrine of love and of compassion. It combined elements of Hinduism, Buddhism and Christianity with Islam. It's no wonder that he was extremely popular with the people of Delhi. The arrogant Sultan Ghiasuddin had little use for the teachings of Hazrat Nizamuddin, nor did he like the saint's popularity. The story goes that when Ghiyas-ud-din ordered the construction of the Tughlakabad Fort, Nizamuddin was building a bawli or tank for use by the thirsty pilgrims who used to throng to him to seek his blessings. The Sultan commandeered all the masons to complete the royal fort and would not spare even a few labourers to work on the Sufis' well. However, the workers were so devoted to the saint that they toiled on the bawli at night after their day's labour on the fort. Ghiyas-ud-din issued a proclamation banning traders from selling oil to Nizamuddin. He wanted to prevent lamps from being lit around the bawli and thus stop work from being carried out at night. This problem too was solved by another fakir, Sheikh Nasiruddin, who was one of Nizamuddin's disciples. It's said that even lamps filled with water by Nasiruddin miraculously lit up and provided enough light for the bawli to be dug. The Sufis' bawli exists till today in the heart of the area known as Hazrat Nizamuddin. Sheikh Nasiruddin too has an area of Delhi named after him. On account of the miracle of the lamps, Sheikh Nasiruddin got known as Roshan Chirag-e-Dilli, or the bright lamp of Delhi. The area where his shrine exists is still called Chirag Dilli. In any event, Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya was so annoyed by Sultan Ghiasuddin that he is said to have cursed the Tughlakabad Fort.
Ya rahe ujjar, ya base gujjar.
It'll either remain uninhabited or wild Gujjars will populate it. Just 5 years after the fort was built, Ghiyas-ud-din died. Tughlakabad was abandoned. It was populated for centuries only by herds of cattle owned by the local pastoral Gujjars. There's another interesting story about how Ghiyas-ud-din met his end. It's said that when the Sultan was in Bengal on a military campaign, he got more and more annoyed as reports reached him of Sheikh Nizamuddin's growing popularity. The Sultan announced his intention of returning to Delhi to tackle the saint. When Nizamuddin was informed of this, he is supposed to have said, "Hunuz Dilli Durast." Delhi is still far away. As it happened, when the Sultan was nearing Delhi, he was greeted by his son, who directed a massive arch of welcome. And precisely when Papa Dear was under the arch, and the son was not, the arch came tumbling down. Ghiyas-ud-din died and lies buried here in the tomb that he'd built for himself. His son, Muhammad bin Tughlak, became the Sultan. Muhammad bin Tughlak too built a city in Delhi. He called it Jahanpana, the refuge of the world. As today's travelers Muhammad bin Tughlak's capital, they can hardly imagine that they are spanning 600 years from the present to the past. The Moroccan traveller Ibn Battuta, who came to India in the 14th century, described vividly the splendours of Jahanpana. The centerpiece of the city was the multi-domed Begumpuri Mosque. Not much remains of Muhammad bin Tughlak's grand refuge of the world. It's visited only by some who occasionally come to pray. And there are others who come just to play. And yet there's something that survives from those times. These succulent kebabs which delight the palates of Delhiites today owe their origins to the period around that of the Tughlaqs. This style of cooking reached its zenith under the Grand Mughals later.
मुग़ल खाने की खासियत यह है कि इसमें दूध, दही और घी का इस्तेमाल ज़्यादा होता है, क्योंकि मुग़ल जो थे वो लड़ाकू लोग थे, तो इसलिए उनको हर वक्त ताकत की ज़रूरत होती थी। तो इसलिए उनके जितने भी खाने हैं उसके अंदर दूध, दही और घी का ज़्यादा इस्तेमाल होता है।
The rough and ready roasted meats preferred by warriors were turned into elaborate curries in more settled times. Meanwhile, Delhi saw unsettled times. Muhammad bin Tughlak decided to shift his capital to Deogiri in the Deccan. This move's been portrayed as the irrational action of a capricious monarch. The shifting of the capital made a great deal of sense. Delhi was constantly threatened by the Mongol hordes who descended on it after crossing the mountainous passes and the plains of Punjab. Deogiri, which was renamed Daulatabad, was a safer site. A concept of India was emerging, and Daulatabad was almost at its geographical center. The fort at Daulatabad, originally built by the Yadava rulers, was attractive in another way. It provided the state-of-the-art defense measures of the times. Nevertheless, Delhiwalas, who've always loved their city, resented the move. They tried to resist it in many ways. But even when they failed in the face of the arrogant Sultan, he in turn was beaten by ecology. There just wasn't enough water around Daulatabad to sustain a capital. Soon after the court had been established there, the weary citizens were ordered to make their long journey back to Delhi once again. The Adilabad fort, built by Muhammad bin Tughlak in the vicinity of his father's tomb, flourished. Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlak made many other radical moves. Every time you handle a currency note, spare a thought for Muhammad bin Tughlak. It was that monarch, far ahead of his times, who launched token currency in India. He'd learnt of the experiment in China, and at least in that respect, he sought to globalize India. Muhammad bin Tughlak failed in popularizing token currency. The intrinsic value of precious metals like gold continued to fascinate Indians in his time, as it does even today. Muhammad bin Tughlak faced failure in another respect too. He took on the Islamic clergy by restricting the influence of the ulema to the mosques. He did not want the clergy to interfere in affairs of state, but the mosque and the state could not be kept totally segregated. It was perhaps too early to affirm the principles of secularism. The historically precocious monarch was largely unsuccessful in his attempts, but he did succeed in establishing a concept of India with a distinctive civilization and with Delhi as its most important city.
The history that is written, the contemporary history of Muhammad bin Tughlak, is not a record of facts. It is a charge sheet against the ruler. So all the events are described not in a chronological order, but in accordance with the enormity of the crime or offence in the eyes of the contemporary historian. Why this bias? He tried to bring about a complete radical change in the social structure and tried to empower the poor. This is something which is quite obvious because Ziauddin Barni, the contemporary historian, gives a list that such a potter, a cobbler, a tailor, a scavenger, they are governors, they are officers and this and that. What is happening? He says that this means that the world is coming to an end.
Muhammad bin Tughlak was ahead of his times, but then in India, time is not unilinear. In Delhi itself, the present is always contiguous with the past. Just a span away from a busy carriageway, a village continues to exist comfortably in another era more than 600 years back in time. In this village nestles another mosque known as the Khirki Masjid on account of the many windows or khirkis that adorn it. The architecture of the mosque is both grand and reflective of the turbulent times in which it was built. It's a wonderful place even now, though a little dark and eerie inside, deserted by its congregation, but much favored by bats. History lives on in the dargah of Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya. Among his followers was Amir Khusro, the poet and historian who saw and chronicled several regimes in Delhi. Amir Khusro is credited with the invention of the sitar. Khusro is also said to have invented the Hindavi language, a creative mixture of Sanskrit, Persian and Arabic. The poet wrote in the language of the common people, of love and of the joy of life. The mausoleums of the saint and the poet continue to attract a wide variety of visitors. In the end, the saint and the poet outlived the sultans. Centuries after their time, Nizamuddin and Amir Khusro tower in spirit over Delhi, as much its cultural icons as the Qutub Minar.